I always say the world needs more courage. Courage is a journey word. And if we're doing courageous things in the messy middle, the destination is usually something meaningful.
I'm Amy Woodall, and this is The Conscious Habit, a show from the People Forward Network. We're teaching you how to incorporate love and consciousness at work, at home, and the world at large. You just heard from Ryan Berman. He is the founder of Courageous, and their tagline is Brave What's Hard. Ryan works with some of the world's largest brands, teaching them and their leaders how to operate with more courage and to help drive change. They've worked with the likes of Atlanta Falcons, Bausch & Lomb, Procter & Gamble, the Houston Texans, all kinds of cool companies. In our conversation today, we get to geek out on courage and how it meets consciousness. Take a listen. Conscious Habit listeners, I'm excited to geek out with our guest today on a topic that we've never really directly addressed on the podcast. And yet I feel like it's such an important attribute for us to truly be the most conscious beings we desire to be in the world and the most conscious leaders we desire to be. We have Ryan Berman joining us today, who is the founder of Courageous Brands, and he is the expert on all things courage. I would say inside and outside of the work life, but Ryan, you really specialize in helping leaders act more courageously. Can you just share with us, where did this passion come from? Like, why courage? Why is that so impactful for you?
First of all, I thought this was like only an hour show. Like we're going to need, is this a docu-series?
That's right. 4-part series. Here we go.
And then in the fourth grade, Amy, I think there's part of us when we're going through our adventure of life that you don't have that awareness. You aren't as conscious. You're just, and again, I didn't think we were going to start here, but I kind of have these 4 S's of life. And when I think about life for a lot of us, the first S is shoved. Like life is shoved at you. You're born, gravity wins. Often what your parents think, now you think, right? They say something and now you believe that to be your idea. And who knows how long the shoved moments go on for, probably like the first 15 years, 18 years of your life. And then we go to college or the workforce, and I think we move into survival mode. That's the second S, and it's full survivor mode. You're just it's the duck. You're the duck, your legs are moving, but on the surface you're trying to be calm. And you're really just not trying to drown. And in the workforce and survivor mode, like you don't get a lot of say. You're like, you'll pay me? I'm in. I don't get to pick my boss. I rarely get to pick where I work. I'm just so excited that somebody wants me. But truly, you're in survivor mode. And I think also in survivor mode, near the end of it, it's the first time you see a little bit of that, oh, I would never do this like that boss did it. Or did they just say that and chop that person's head off? So there's that list you don't want to be on, the you learn what to do by watching what not to do list. I think that's also happens in the survivor mode bucket. And you start to decide like, okay, I'm not going to do that. This is what I am going to do. And you move slowly into the next S, which I think is success mode. And success mode is slightly conscious. It's more conscious than survival mode for sure. And you're like, okay, I'm starting to figure this out. What do I say yes to? What do I say no to? You're starting to make a little bit of money. And I think success mode could last for 20, 30 years. Some people never leave success mode. Hopefully some people leave survival mode and get into success mode. And then I think for me, around 40 is when the final S popped, which was soul mode. And soul mode was the concept of both, like, I want it all. I want to make money, but I don't want to just make money. I want to do it the right way. I don't want to just win. I want to win the right way, not win at all costs. I want to give back. I want to mentor. I want to design a life where I'm surrounded by people that I'm energized by and that I'm providing energy for. And so if I take those S's, right? And I really think about those S's. That's kind of the trajectory of my career. Like moving to New York City was courageous for me. I didn't think I thought about it that way. I was in survival mode. I was just trying to get into a big ad agency network in New York City, landed in a 700 person agency, learned story from like crazy madmen who I was terrified of, but taught me how to tell a story in this media obese world that we live in. That was courageous of me to move to San Diego. I moved out, came out here to write movies, not live one. I never meant to be an entrepreneur. It was courageous of me to figure out how to be an entrepreneur with my partner's fear and stubbornness, right? And like figuring it out as I went along. And so I think it took me till around 40. And at that moment, my agency, we were around 90 people. And it was the first time in 15 years where I wasn't in the day job. And I was going to write a book to position the business, and it was all about courageous ideas are the only ones that matter. And as I started to go on that journey, I think that's when I realized my love of the word courage. And you can't help but then look at your own choices, although they weren't conscious, or I didn't feel I had the awareness to really recognize them. Once I got into the book writing process and realized, oh, this book is way more than it's like I thought I was writing it as a devious new business tool. It never meant it to be a rite of passage for me. I've got kids watching every move I make. I want them to live a courageous life. That was when I started to realize there's something about this word that's really landing for me. And if you want to put a little bow on how it plays to your show, the more people I spoke to, and I now call it, I interviewed the brave, the bullish, and the brainiac. I just try to get out of the way and like listen to really smart people. I was like, wow, like I thought I was writing a book about courageous ideas and realized courageous ideas die without courageous leaders. There's a big graveyard for courageous ideas, and they never make it to the light of day if you don't have a courageous leader who's championing that idea. And you know why these ideas die? There's politics, there's fear, all the things we deal with in corporate America. So I think long way to your answer or to your question, but that's my answer.
I like that reflection back, by the way. Those 4 S's are awesome. And I was sort of reflecting on my own life's path of being like, okay, yeah, the shoved. I remember that. And oh, by the way, I have 17 and 19-year-old sons. And I'm like, oh, shit, they're probably in that shoved stage. I apologize, boys. I hope it was not all bad. And then to know, I was just telling somebody yesterday, I don't think I would go back to my 20s for anything because of that survival mode of feeling so lost. And it's meant to be that way. But stepping into success and even into soul, I got into soul work in my sort of mid 30s. It was like being lost and then being found. And now I'm not afraid to be lost again because of that, that step. I love how you reflected on where you've been courageous in your life, because I think it's very easy for us to see the mountain that's still yet to be climbed and all of this stuff, but to recognize even in our sort of unconscious or subconscious mind where we could be courageous. And so in the work that you're doing in the world and teaching leaders, and listeners, we talk about this a lot. Like, you don't have to be a leader by title. Just listening to this podcast, you are a freaking leader because you operate from a different level. So leader by mindset. But walk us through, like, what does it mean to be a courageous leader? How would I be able to tell the difference between a leader who is just mediocre status quo and one who is willing and able to be courageous?
So for one, I think it starts by acknowledging that you need to know what's worth standing up for and what isn't. And if you don't know what you stand for, you never know when to take a stand. So I've mentioned this a couple times, so this is going to sound like a shameless plug, but so my book's called Return on Courage. Like I mentioned, it's less of a soapbox, let me tell you how smart I am book, and more like a documentary. And it was a little red pill, blue pill, Amy. Like I was just like looking to get certain questions answered and tried to stay disciplined on that in order for me to then move on to the next question. And the first red pill, blue pill moment was the definition of courage. And if you look at the dictionary definition of courage, it is the ability to do something that frightens you. You even just mentioned the muscle of you're not afraid to get lost because it's now a little bit more familiar to you because you had to figure it out. That muscle is developed. It's never perfect. It's like leg day. Sometimes you miss leg day, right? But it's the same thing. And I didn't like this definition of the ability to do something that frightens you because while it's true, where's the utility in the definition? If I see myself as someone that wants to be courageous, do I just do everything that frightens me? And that makes me like, I didn't see how that was useful. So I wanted to come up with a better definition that could help you spot where you could be courageous. And then you have to pick your spots. Like if courage is a currency, you'll be broke as and exhausted, by the way, emotionally broke if you try to use courage everywhere. So the first 6 months of the book writing process was just, could I beat this definition? And where we landed was, okay, this is interesting. There's three levers and you need each one in order for it to be a courageous act. There's knowledge plus faith plus action equals courage. And as you said, like if you're listening to this show, you're a leader, right? And I've said in the past, Amy, hey, leaders are not necessarily bosses, and bosses are not necessarily leaders, right? And so here's a situation where if you're listening, you're like, okay, how can I apply more courage in my life? Well, you're never going to have all the knowledge you need to make a call. And there are a lot of companies that are waiting on the data. And I don't mean to piss off the data people that are listening, but like, you're never going to have 100% of the answer. And if you think, oh, we're going to wait for all the data, we're going to wait for all the knowledge, you're going to get passed by a competitor you see or don't see. There's some crew out of a garage right now working to take you down. And so, what do you need to know in order for it to move into the next phase, which is the faith component? And when we talk about faith, we don't mean it in the religious sense. We mean it in the conviction sense, the inner belief sense, right? How often have you known something and you felt something and then nothing ever happens? And so it needs to be all three. It's got to be knowledge, there has to be faith, and there has to be action. And if you remove just one of those levers, the definition changes. Knowledge and faith without action is paralysis, right? And faith and action without knowledge is reckless. And knowledge and action without faith, if you've been at a company for 25 years and you're kind of just going through the motions and you're numb, you're working on safe. You're working on status quo. Now, I'm not here to vilify that behavior. You have your reasons. For me, who I like to work with are people that aren't afraid to like be courageous. It's think, which is the knowledge component. It's feel, which is the faith component, and it's do, which is the action component. So knowledge plus faith plus action equals courage. And that's everything we do at Courageous, whether it's with courageous leaders or courageous teams, always is like, all right, this is the knowledge gathering phase. This is the faith building phase. And this is the action taking phase. We really try to utilize that as our North Star compass. And we make it a process so we can operationalize courage for leaders and companies.
Which one do you see bypassed most often? Kind of when you see people who are not operating courageously, which one is usually missing and why is that?
I'd say the older I get, the more sophisticated the clients are, right? So I don't think knowledge is a problem. Like there's a lot of smart people. EQ is a whole nother convo, but there's a lot of IQ, right? Or there's investments, like the conversations we're having about AI, right? Like there's a lot of access to knowledge. So I would say knowledge isn't usually the problem. I mean, harnessing that knowledge and turning that into perspective is another convo altogether as well. I would say it's primarily action, like people that know what to do and feel it, and for some reason they don't make the investment, or it's like a drizzle. It's not like a heavy pour, right? Like they haven't really taken the leap on the action. So I think it's action is probably one, and guess what? The less action you take with your best people, the less faith they have. And so then it starts to like dials on an amp. The other ones kind of gets quieter and quieter. But I think the more action you take, the more learning opportunities there are, more knowledge presents itself. I have this one slide that I love to present. It's kind of a choose your own adventure where it's like, look, courage breeds courage. Like the more you do it, the more you build that muscle and the more the team feels that they can experiment. And the less we do it, that's when fear presents itself and fear breeds fear. And we've all been in an organization where like the necks go away and everyone feels like they're on eggshells and nobody can share their versions of the truth. And I think that is a fear-based organization and it's really hard to get out of that too.
I have so many questions spinning off from that, but I just want to like reiterate it's really cool that you shared it's action. My gut said, is it action? Because even when I think about myself and my own entrepreneurial journey, there's been plenty of times where I felt like I had enough knowledge. I never get too hung up on knowledge, by the way. I sort of have the faith that I will figure shit out as I go. But the less action we take, the less opportunity we give ourselves to reinforce the faith, whether it's in us or other people, as you mentioned. Like the less action you take, the less faith your people are going to have within you. The less action you take, the less lessons that you get along the way that can improve the knowledge base. And so, is it fair to say everything is strengthened through action? Although the other two are absolutely necessary, action strengthens the other two components.
Absolutely. And I'm smiling a little bit because I think you and I are simpatico. Like there's probably times, I mean, I think you're giving, my gut says in the spirit, like I always say, I get paid to tell the truth, right? That's one of the beautiful things about the courage business.
I love that. I'm a soothsayer too. Me and you.
So we're simpatico. I think we're simpatico. And I will say, I mean this in the most loving way, Amy. You are also probably a little reckless, as am I. If that means I'm going to take an action and see what I learn and then course correct. I don't mean you're going to like, well, we just put the mortgage on the line here, right? Like, but to your point, like you nailed it. I think you almost have to be like a tint careless or carefree, maybe, right? To go take action and know that there's going to be a learning at the end of that experiment. As a guy that's played with words for a living, I love the word experiment. So if I'm a leader right now listening to this podcast, what experiments can you put in play that gives you permission to be a little careless or careful with what you try? There will be a learning on the end of that, and that your faith should go up. I'll give you a great example. So when I started writing Return on Courage, and again, this first 6 months, I was not seeing a lot of, is this a monetizable idea? Like, am I wasting my own company's resource, my own time? And I was like, I went hunting. I was like on a fact finding mission to find like, who am I really helping with this book? Because a lot of leaders are like, courage. I have so many emails to get through, or like, I've got a board call in 2 months. I'm just trying to get through that. And I'm like, oh shit, what a waste of time. How much money have I wasted on resources? And then I finally got a few little wins. Jay Cone Gilbert, who started B Corporation, he also started And One. He's like absolutely critical. And it's kind of like an aperture when you take a picture. It's like just outside the core area. But when you put it into focus, you realize how important it is for everything else you do on a long-term scale. And so it's like, okay, like what can I do with that? There's something here. And then I got to interview Russell Weiner, who's now the CEO of Domino's. He was the chief marketing officer at first. I mean, they basically told America their pizza sucked and that they had messed up. And oh, yes, we did. They changed everything from the crust and the dough and the sauce. And just by being human, and by the way, he would acknowledge it was a courageous idea, but he had a plan B in case it didn't work. And I'm like, okay, I can work with this. And he just kept following the string and following the string and realized, yeah, courage is the thing. It is absolutely essential in any leader that's trying to get the most out of their people. We just don't have the tools, the framework, the words, the confidence to be courageous and to lead courageously. So that is really where the joy now comes from. Amy, it's like, I would say we're fear fighters. We've been fighting fear since 2019. Like, not Foo Fighters, love the band, but Let's track down the fear and smoke it out and address it versus suppress it.
Ladies, imagine taking time away to work on you. Meditation, yoga, transformational work, a chance to have grand adventures and build lasting relationships. Desiree Garcia and I founded High Vibe Tribe Retreats to create just that. And if you're curious about joining us on our next retreat, head over to highvibetriberetreat.com, link in the show notes. Yeah, and I think, I love what you guys are doing. The tagline for Conscious Habit and the work that we do in the world is the root of result begins within. And same with courage. It's like our external results of, we're just trying to get through the things. We're in survival mode, to your point. Like that is such a reflection of what is happening inwardly. And it requires some courage to even be a more conscious being, because we have to be willing to look at what is my automatic response? What is my hardwiring? And I might be hardwired towards fear. Maybe I'm a firstborn, and not me, I'm a middle child. I'm a rebel, middle child, rule breaker. Gave my parents all their gray hair, but maybe I'm a firstborn. And so I was taught to be careful and uncertain. And it takes courage to notice and choose differently. And in your point of like taking that action, I love the breakdown of that, the knowledge, the faith, and the action. For people who are in organizations, because you mentioned, like, I guarantee you can walk in with your expertise and all the things that you've done in these incredible brands, these Fortune 500, you're working with NFL teams, you're working with, many of the brands that we could walk into our pantry and, see them kind of lined up. I guarantee you could walk into an organization and probably people watch for about 5 to 10 minutes and figure out how much courage truly exists within that culture. In that kind of watching, what is it that you notice? What is the difference between a more courageous culture or more courageous leaders versus ones who are maybe operating in that survival or scarcity space?
So I think it starts by acknowledging what happened before I got in the room. I mean, this is my fourth creative type of company that I've started. And the first time I got the name right, it's like, we're all learning. We all mess up. I've had good names in the past. Like my last creative agency was called IDEA. We called it that. Obviously it's idea, but we couldn't trademark idea. So we went with IDEA. And we used to break down that company as half of our business was the powerful idea side and half was the powering idea side. And they both made each other better. But we'd still get phone calls from people that were like, we need some other service that wasn't about the idea. And we would take that. I don't get calls from people now if they don't believe in courage. So I'll get a call from a leader who's like, tell them what I've been telling them. We just hear it from somebody else. Somebody else has to say, well, what I've been saying, right? Like, right, these are facts. These are facts. So I have to acknowledge it's like a song that you heard on the radio 100 times. It doesn't mean jack, but then you have a first kiss to it. And you can't not hear the song. Courage has to matter to you already for me to get the call. So by the time I come in already, there's at least a little bit of a qualified lead, maybe not by everyone, but by a leader that's saying we need to be a little bit more courageous. 80% of the time, someone who's bringing me in is probably like that. Hey, like, we know we need to hit the gas. We could use a little inspiration. We could use a little perspective. Can you come in and help us? 20% of the time, you'll have a leader that goes, we can't figure this out. We really can't figure this out. Like, ego has been put aside. They've almost surrendered that, which is hard to do as the leader. I've had working with one specific client right now and when the president pulls you aside and says, we have not cracked our vision. Do you know how courageous I've known him for 5 minutes and he had the courage to admit that. And I'm like, this is somebody I want to work with. So I think the answer is in that answer. Like, there's an open-mindedness, there's a willingness, there's a realness, there's truth there.
And it sounds like vulnerability too, like to be able to say openly, we don't know, we don't have it, we're not aligned. That's a vulnerability where you know that somebody's willing to share the whole truth, and that is scary to do because it could invite judgment. It could invite, whispers, but yeah, very cool of that CEO to do.
Right. And so I think it starts with, and I think vulnerability is the word, right? Like godmother, courage moment, Brene Brown, right? Like giving a little love to her. I think it starts with that. I think there's a curiosity. I think it's another word we looked at for courage is like how curious is the organization and what type of questions do they ask? What type of questions do they shut down? It's decision tree on things like that as well. It's funny. Our tagline is brave what's hard. And the hard stuff is really what we like doing. There's two doors we now find ourselves entering. And again, we're figuring this thing out as we go along too. So in the early days, it was, hey, Ryan, can you come do a keynote and talk about what you learned on the journey? And then you realize, well, hold on, the definition of insanity is to continue to bring in a keynote speaker and then everyone's all fired up and they go back to their lives and then like they get back into the weeds of email and all that inspiration and energy goes away and no one's holding the organization accountable to what we said we would do at the offsite. So where we are now, there's almost two ways we work with businesses, and it is leadership, it is courageous conversations or courageous decisions, but it's also the accountability piece. It's still courageous ideas and courageous change, but like, hey, we said we were going to do this. If we're going to operationalize this, like maybe we come in and run your lunch and learn series. Maybe we're the ones that are, checking in with you on a monthly basis. We're like part therapist at this point. I mean, it is what it is, right? But it's very lonely to be a leader. And I think we recognize that we can be the best friend we can be and keep it. And sometimes there's tough love. That's fair too. That's all part of the statement of works now is like, how do we truly be available and present for those leaders?
And I think for listeners to do a little reflection, I think always a me first thing. It's very easy to learn something and our immediate response is, oh, so and so needs to hear this. But I don't know if y'all remember me saying this 15 million times on the podcast, but the world is our mirror, and what we believe others need is honestly what we need. And I often will tell people that when I'm doing a keynote is like, listen, you're probably going to think, oh, I wish Bobby Joe was over here because they really need to be hearing this. And if that comes out of your mouth, please listen twice because we often need the messages we think others would be inspired by. So eating our own lunch, if you will, in those capacities. But for people listening to say, how am I doing? How courageous am I? Before we start to look at our culture and our entire team, how am I doing? Am I willing to be vulnerable? Where is my sort of knowledge, faith, and courage? What can I do that's courageous today? Ryan, I imagine you give people some of those challenges, along the way. If somebody's listening to this and they think, I not only want to be more courageous, but I want to help our team be more courageous. What are some of the steps you encourage them to take?
So I love your point about we're all mirrors. I couldn't agree more with you. Right. And I think sometimes it's easy to think about how others respond to our behavior, meaning when I'm scared, I might not realize that that residue is going to land on somebody else, or if I'm a jerk, you're going to be a jerk. If I'm kind, you're going to be kind. But I also like the mirror the other way. Like if there's two of you, and it's funny, I'm working on a book about self-talk right now. And the idea is that there's two of you. There's two of you in there. Like the only way you can actually fully be yourself is to acknowledge that there's the negative self-talk you and there's the positive self-talk you. And who's going to win? You versus you, right? When we're calling the negative self-talk you the monster and the positive self-talk is the maverick. There's a constantly dialogue. And if you're not careful, if you haven't built up the maverick muscle, guess who's going to win and guess who's going to show up in the world. So I think it starts exactly, Amy, where you already said. It starts with you finding ways to have honest conversations with yourself. And most people suppress fear. versus address fear. And so instead of suppressing it, like, what do you need to tell yourself? What does that mean? How do you do that? Maybe that's like 2 minutes of journaling in the morning. And maybe that's your yoga time. One of the things that I do is I change all the labels on my cell phone, on my alarms. So in the morning, the first thing I see are the things I need to see. And sometimes they change. So like I've got my values on there: optimism, creativity, courage, and excellence. Because I want to start my day off on the right foot. And we're human and we forget this stuff. So I'm like, oh yeah, I said this was important. Let me go do that. Or there have been times in my life where deep, deep down inside me, I knew I believed something, but my own monster was telling me I wasn't qualified to talk about a topic. Right. So in the book, I talk about, wow, and you nailed this earlier too. You have this thing called your central nervous system. Okay, when was the last time a normal human brought that up in layman terms at the dinner table? Amy, how's your central nervous system today? Oh, did you see the game last night? LeBron's central nervous system was unbelievable. Like, who talks like that? Nobody. But like this is the thing that's calling all of the shots, right? Central at the core of you, a system, an operating system. It's a computer, and right there in the center is nervous. Don't suggest that to the boss. Don't move to that city. And I think your nervous system is doing what it's supposed to do, which is trying to keep you safe. And so I was like, oh, as I was going through the book writing process, I was like, I wonder if I can help people develop a central courage system to combat their central nervous system. So imagine coming up with that in like somewhere deep below the monster. I know in my heart it's the right move, but the monster's telling me, you're not a doctor. If you went to school for 7 years, it's because you partied too much, right? It wasn't because, right? And so I changed the label on my alarm. So I would see build strong central courage systems. And I had to see that every day. I had to see it every day because I knew in my heart it was the right move. But I hadn't even won myself over yet. Now I can say it with confidence because I've seen it so much. And so I think it starts with, what conversation do you have to have with yourself? If I'm a leader, and now how do you take what you believe out into the world? This is going to sound like an error. What I'm about to say is really what I mean to say. We always say that the re sets you free. Okay. What is your re? You could do to re energize your people. Do you need to rethink your ideas? Do you need to reinvent your tomorrow? Do you need to re galvanize yourself? Unless you're in startup mode, which most of us really aren't, there's some repair work that has to happen. It's the re. And I think having an honest conversation with your team and then giving them space and permission to go, what's our re? What is the first re we need to address? Are we re-energized? We need to re-galvanize ourselves. Do we love where we're going? Do we need to rethink where we're going? So the amount of times I'll say the re sets you free, what's the first re we need to attack? I think it starts there. As a leader, you're just like, it's okay that we don't have it all figured out. And finding that re and attacking it is the key.
I love that advice, by the way. I've been giving that to, my 19-year-old son of like, it's okay not to know what you want the rest of your life to look like. And I think there's so much pressure we put on ourselves at every age that like somehow it needs to be all clear and we need to know. And it's really, it's really okay to do it uncertain. That in itself is a courageous act, I'm sure. I often hear from folks, especially we get feedback on the show, and there are people who are very conscious in their own mind, but they may not be surrounded by conscious people. And I know that can be frustrating because it feels like you are kind of bearing the weight and pulling people along. And I'm curious if you have any advice for those folks who they're willing to take a look within. They're willing to do some of the hard stuff, the courageous stuff. They're willing to even have or initiate some of those tough conversations, even with the risk of retribution that could come back to them. What advice do you have, though, in that frustration that the things around them aren't following suit?
So, do you mind me asking you a question before I dive into this one?
Yeah, let's turn the tables. I like it.
All right. Obviously, I have a love story with courage, and you have a love story with consciousness. So I'll ask you the question. I'm asking you the question here, Amy. Like, the first thing I honestly thought of is that you have this base of people who are obviously conscious. That's why they listen. And maybe they're frustrated that they wish more people around them were conscious. Like, have you brought everyone together? Have you brought everyone together yet? Have they met?
I feel like we need a conscious habit, a conscious collective meetup for sure.
Okay. Because I always say the world needs more courage. Courage is a journey word. And if we're doing courageous things in the messy middle, the destination is usually something meaningful. On the other side of that, even though there's fear, there's happiness. And I also think there's winning. I think there's the ways to win the right way. I've definitely said courage brands win. If I'm on an island with consciousness, I could see why that would be really, really frustrating. But at the same time, you are the person people go to, and you being you, Amy, but also you being the listener. You're the person on the team that people go to for that perspective. You are, in fact, maybe, and this is not surprising for a guy that has optimism as a number one value, it should probably make you smile that your role is to make sure we're slowing down a little bit and remembering X, Y, or Z. The world created you this way, right? There's no reason to try to figure out how did that happen. You just are conscious. You're the one. And when other people have the blinders on, maybe you can help them see and be more aware. And that's your superpower. That's what makes you you. I want to be quick with the story, but we had a guest on one of our action chats. We ran these courageous action chats where we tried to bring our community together. And we had a guy named Damon West come on. Damon was he was a college football star quarterback, and he got injured and it went south fast and like but not good. Like ended up he was in Texas. Somehow he started, I don't even know the leap, but like like was stealing pharmaceuticals from people's houses, and there was a whole ring, and he got caught. And he was going to jail. And in his orientation in jail, he met a Red like character. And for those of you who don't know Red, I'm talking about Shawshank Redemption Red, the character. Red was sort of like the sage master, and Red said to Damon, "Are you the carrot? Are you the egg? Or are you the coffee bean?" And he's like, "I'm really sorry, but I don't know. I'm not following. I am not tracking." And Red said, "Look, jail is like a boiling pot of hot water. What happens if you put an egg into boiling hot water? The egg hardens. Are you going to be the hardest person in jail? Laws of attraction. Do you think you're going to see somebody hard and you're going to try to out hard in jail? Is that a good strategy to stay alive in jail? No. Okay. What happens if you put a carrot into boiling hot water? Amy, what's the answer?
It softens.
Yeah, not a great place to be in jail either, by the way. Like, fold like a lawn chair. That's a tough place to be." And he said, "What happens when you put a coffee bean in boiling hot water? Well, you change the environment. You make delicious coffee. You make everything around you better. You make the water different. Be the coffee bean." And so if you're a conscious leader, I would say be the coffee bean. Your job is to make everyone else around just a little bit more thoughtful. Take the blinders down. That's probably your role on the team. And as much as you want to, find your people, like that's why you listen to Amy's podcast, because there's a lot of folks who are here that are conscious. And my hope is that you gain energy from conversations like this that you can then take out into the world and then hopefully smile a little bit more.
I love all of this advice. I think for myself, like I want to create a post-it. I'm very much a post-it note girl that's like it needs to go on my mirror in the bathroom or like on my laptop or something that is just this reminder of like one courageous act. You mentioned either prior to us hitting record or after, so I apologize to the audience if but I think you mentioned like it's not that we have to be in this courageous space all the time because that's not human nature, but we've got to kind of know, be in tune with and be conscious enough to know when courage is calling. And so one courageous act, that's going to be my to do. I would love for the listeners to consider that as well. And Ryan, Can you help our listeners understand, like, what is the best way to stay connected with you, your community, the things that you're doing? How do they find you in the world?
Yeah. So first of all, everyone says it, but I truly am grateful that we got to jam when we did, and it's just cool to see we're both detectives in our own ways, like studying our spheres, our different C spheres, we'll call it. Uh, best way to stay in touch with me is probably through ryanberman.com. I have a weekly dose of courage that I put out. It's 80% head, 20% heart, and it goes out every Thursday. I'm not trying to invade anyone's email space, but if you're looking for that little nudge, that's a good way to get started. And then I have my own courageous podcast as well, which Amy, we need to get you on that because I want to hear what your courageous act is going to be, but we'll save that for that episode. And then find me on LinkedIn, Ryan Berman. I think it's like /courageous ideas. Just look me up. And then I think people say this all the time, and you don't believe them. It's like your kids not believing you, and like it's okay not to know. They're like, Mom, no, you actually mean that, but they don't totally believe that. I want to know how you're doing. Like, find me on LinkedIn. Let me know, where do you need courage? What is hard in your life right now? And if I can help you overcome that, and maybe start with Return on Courage. I think the book, that the process of how we do what we do really came from us taking 2 years and just listening and trying to connect the dots. And whether you're a leader or just a human, I think you'll learn something about yourself. It really is inside out courage. It really does start with you. And then, do you have the courage to be that person in everything you do moving forward?
Love that. Ryan, I'm so, so grateful that you took the time to share your wisdom with us and your insights and your experiences. And just thank you for the work you do in the world. I think everybody doing some form of conscious work, right? Teaching people how to be courageous it's really conscious work. There is such a ripple effect of good that happens in people's personal lives, of being reminded of what they're made of and what they're capable of, and the ripple effect of good from those mission, vision, values that people get to actually live alive in their organization. So thank you. Super grateful.
Of course. Thanks for having me on the show. Let's stay in touch. Deal?
Deal. Before we wrap up this episode, here are my takeaways from Ryan and how we can incorporate them into our lives. Number one, can we just give a shout out to the 4 S's? I loved this definition of where we are in life. Are we in the shoved, the survive, the success, or have we moved towards the soul? I think it's courageous to take a look at where we are. Sometimes it can be uncomfortable conversations. I know I danced kind of in success and soul for a long time. It has felt a lot better when I'm aligned with the soul. I'd love to hear from you where you feel like you currently are. Number 2, I like Ryan's definition of courage, that it is knowledge, it is faith, and it is action. And if any one of those pieces are missing, we cannot act in integrity with our own courage. And I think just to kind of mix in, maybe it's like a 2.1 here, he had mentioned that courageous idea dies without courageous leaders. So if you have courageous ideas, even if you don't have a leadership title, how can you honor courage with those 3 things? With knowledge, with faith, and with action. And number 3 is a reflection I've had since our conversation, and it's going to be a challenge to you. One courageous act every day. What is one thing that everything in my heart and soul says don't do it because I'm pushing my comfort zone? But I'm going to do it as an act of defiance to my own comfort zone. One courageous act. Maybe it's one tough conversation, one big ask. Maybe it's a reach out to a prospect you feel like they're going to turn you down, but it could be courageous just to go for a no. What's that going to look like for you? Thanks for listening to the Conscious Habit Podcast. If you dug this episode, we'd love it if you would subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And if you're into this consciousness thing, if you like this conversation and you want to meet more like-minded people, head on over to Facebook and join the Conscious Habit community. Until next time, do the world a favor and go love yourself.